Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Wes Yang will now kick off our presentation.
Yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And now in USA is 9 p.m. Thank you for Lauren and her teams to open the webinar. And whether you are an early stage startup or scaling MedTech company in Asia, today's session is about helping you unlock the US market, the largest and the most lucrative healthcare market in the world. So we will show you what it really takes to enter and succeed in commercials in the US based on our combined expertise across the both regions. B-Link and BMMG have partnered to bring you end-to-end commercialization support across both the US and Asia. So together we bridge the strategy and the execution, include regulatory, marketing, demand generation, and the sales enablement. So you can go further, faster, and smarter in both markets. B-Link is my consulting company, B-Link, is a strategic consultancy focused on B2B and MedTech growth. We specialize in account-based marketing, CRM optimization, and digital sales enablement. So our cross-border experience includes projects across Taiwan, Japan, Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, and the US. So helping companies turn strategies into repeatable revenue agents in highly regulated industries.
West, and at BMMG, we help MedTech companies translate scientific innovation into market traction. Our work spans regulatory compliant branding, clinical content, investor storytelling, and go-to-market execution. With over a decade of experience supporting US commercialization, we know how to help Asian companies gain US traction efficiently and without wasting time or capital. So before we dive into the strategy, we want to briefly introduce the leadership behind today's session and the teams driving this collaboration between BMMG and B-Linked. I'm joined by Wes Yang. He is the founder and CEO of B-Linked. He brings over 15 years of global experience across MedTech, health, and industrial sectors. His work focuses on helping B2B companies grow through digital innovation, ABM, and go-to-market transformation. He's a true expert in CRM optimization and sales enablement strategies. I'm also joined by Andy Shu, Vice President at B-Linked, who has over 20 years of commercial experience in both IT and MedTech. He spent the last 6 years focused on scaling MedTech companies globally, building distribution networks, leading go-to-market strategy, and driving revenue growth. And I'm Lauren Dussman. I'm CEO of BMMG, and my background is in launching MedTech innovations in the US market. At BMMG, we specialize in turning strong clinical technology into commercially viable business through strategic marketing, messaging, and evidence-driven demand generation. Together, we partner to help bridge the gap between Asian MedTech innovators and the US market, equipping you with the knowledge, frameworks, and tools to build early traction without needing a massive US commercial team. So let's look at why the US matters. The US represents more than $200 billion in annual MedTech spending, which is more than Europe and Asia combined. It's home to more than 6,000 hospitals, 900 integrated delivery networks, and the top 10 global investors in MedTech. Also, the average per capita health expenditure is over $12,000 compared to $500 to $1,000 in most Asian markets. This makes it the ideal environment for high-value technologies that improve outcomes, reduce costs, or solve previously unmet needs. So today's session is structured to give you both strategic insight and practical tactics. We'll compare Asian and US markets across regulatory, commercial, and strategic lenses. We'll show you how to tailor your positioning for different US stakeholders, including HCPs, hospital admins, payers, and patients. We'll explain how clinical evidence drives awareness and adoption in the US, where 83% of hospital procurement teams require published outcomes before engaging with vendors. We'll share how to launch with limited budgets without compromising credibility, And finally, we'll highlight the role of KOLs, conferences, and digital platforms in breaking through the noise. So the US is where clinical impact meets commercial scale. It's home to more than 330 million people, but 10% of facilities account for 90% of purchasing power in many specialties. MedTech funding also continues to flow, with more than $23 billion raised in 2023 alone, despite broader venture headwinds. Hospitals face staffing shortages, cost pressures, and value-based care metrics. That creates urgency for innovations that improve efficiency, reduce readmissions, or enable better outpatient care. Asia may offer a quicker entry, but the US provides global validation, and that validation fuels partnerships, exits, and ultimately long-term growth. So looking at the US to Asia comparison for regulatory strategy shapes your go-to market timeline. In Asia, many markets like Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, they allow for faster registration, but they can lack consistent enforcement or coverage policies. The US FDA requires rigorous data, but offers more transparency, credibility, and long-term returns. A 510(k) clearance typically takes between 6 to 12 months with strong predicates, and the de novo or PMA pathways can take 9 to 36 months, but the reward is access to reimbursed, high-value channels. Investors and KOLs often view FDA clearance as the gold standard for global scaling. Also, the US market is consolidated into payer-driven. 3 GPOs control access to over 80% of the hospitals. Private insurers, CMS, and value-based care models drive adoption based on data, not relationships. In contrast, Asia is more fragmented with variable reimbursements, and that creates reliance on direct sales or distributor networks. So it may be faster to close initial deals, but it's harder to scale without a local champion or a price sensitivity management. The key takeaway here is that the US requires proof and polish, whereas Asia generally requires agility and adaptation. So the US go-to-market playbook is also more evidence-heavy than over in Asia. US clinicians expect peer-reviewed publications, real-world case studies, and ROI calculators before adoption. US investors, unlike Asia counterparts, prioritize regulatory milestones, market access plans, and KOL endorsements before funding. In Asia, speed and access matter more. Relationships with government hospitals or private chains can accelerate access. Price is a bigger barrier, especially in markets where out-of-pocket payments dominate. So when coming to the US, plan to localize your commercial model and team structured based on where you're entering first. And when deciding where to launch first, consider a couple things. Number one, your company stage. Are you pre-revenue or are you Series B? Also, your device complexity. Is your tech disruptive or is it incremental? And then also clinical validation. Do you already have published outcomes or do you still need pilot data? US entry definitely costs more, but it can also return more. So depending on your approval pathway, 510(k) versus PMA, you could have to spend between $2 and $5 million to reach commercial proof points in the US. But successful launches here can lead to premiums of 3 to 5 times in valuation at exit versus Asia-only strategies. In short, align your market strategy with your funding runway, evidence strength, and long-term business model. So success in the US hinges on stakeholder-specific value propositions. Here's what matters. Healthcare providers need clinical confidence. 89% say they won't adopt without peer validation or comparative evidence. Administrators, hospital administrators specifically, focus on cost savings, length of stay, and patient throughput. Your technology has to support their KPIs. Patients care about safety, ease of use, and improved outcomes, and that's especially in direct-to-consumer or elective categories. And also, payers want population-level impact. If your technology reduces readmission rates or replace costlier procedures, then that's the story that you need to tell. You must package your value in stakeholder language and then support it with evidence. In the US, clinical proof is not a bonus, it's a prerequisite. Consider this: 71% of hospital committees require clinical studies during evaluation, and 94% of payers require published data before issuing new reimbursement code or pathway. Evidence is the foundation of both marketing and sales enablement. It shapes awareness, trust, and traction. If your current studies are based in Asia, consider building a US pilot or investigator-led trial to meet market expectations. To influence US buyers, your marketing must behave more like scientific communications. So I know we've already talked about this, but again, you really need to focus on those clinical outcomes. Document improvements in metrics like readmission rates, adverse events, or diagnostic speed. Utilize case studies. Use named physicians or centers whenever possible. Anonymized case studies still matter if they're tied to a specialty, but again, the real power comes with having a face and a name put with your case studies. Also, think about peer-reviewed publications. So these, sometimes it's odd, but they can carry as much weight as regulatory clearance. A single publication in JAMA or an equivalent can really change the game from a regulatory approval and adoption standpoint. And importantly, this same data fuels your investor deck, sales rep training, KOL presentations, conference booths, and even social campaigns. So think of your data as a commercial engine and not just a regulatory requirement. Also, you don't need a Super Bowl ad budget to win early adopters. Here's what works. Start small but targeted. So focus on 3 to 5 US centers of excellence that are aligned with your indication. Use advisory boards and KOL pilots to build credibility and content. And also allocate maybe $5,000 to $10,000 a month for content, outreach, and digital targeting. That number that I shared is well below typical US launch costs, but it's a great starting point. And also remember, in MedTech, relevance beats reach. Your audience is niche. So focus on being known by the right 500 people, not 50,000 non-applicable strangers. The first thing that we're going to dive into here is thought leadership. So thought leadership isn't a luxury, it's a credibility builder. Again, publish in niche journals, specialty blogs, or on platforms like LinkedIn and MedTech Dive. This positions your founder or your CTO as a clinical and commercial voice worth listening to. Also, research shows that 67% of US hospital leaders are more likely to meet with a company if their executive is already viewed as a thought leader. Focus on sharing clinical insights, market trends, and patient outcomes, not just product claims. Authenticity and scientific relevance build trust. Next is KOL engagement. Your fastest path to adoption in the US starts with the right physicians. So look at 3 to 5 highly credible practicing clinicians who are already publishing, presenting, and they also influence institutional adoption. The way that you can work with them is co-author a case study or invite them to co-host a webinar. Let them validate your message and act as a trusted messenger. Also leverage their networks. One respected KOL can unlock access to hospital buyers, other clinicians, and even investors. And remember, US KOLs often sit on procurement or P&T committees, which give them real influence. Next, let's look at a targeted trade show presence. So, contrary to popular belief, trade shows don't require massive booths to make an impact. Focus on 1 or 2 specialty-specific US conferences. You do not want to spread yourself too thin. Also, make sure that you schedule a meeting in advance, have demo-ready messaging, and conduct outreach both before and after the show. Companies who pre-book just 10 targeted meetings often walk away with 6 or more follow-up calls or pilot opportunities. Also, think about small side events like KOL dinners or roundtables. Those can outperform even large and elaborate exhibit spaces. And then next, look at micro-targeting versus mass media. The US MedTech audience, again, is niche, not mass. So skip those broad ad campaigns which require the Super Bowl budget, and instead focus on earned media, targeted LinkedIn outreach, and clinician platforms like Doximity or ResearchGate. Reinforce your clinical value, vision, and unique differentiators through case-based storytelling, not just highlighting product features. Also, by focusing narrowly, You'll build brand recognition where it counts and avoid wasting your budget on impressions that will never convert. There are 3 high impact channels that level the playing fields. So we talked about them a little bit in the previous slide, and we're going to dive back into those a little bit deeper here. So again, KOLs in the US, peer influence is very powerful. And as I already shared, KOLs often sit on hospital buying committees, they publish in top journals, and they advise the FDA or even the CMS. So choose your KOL partner based on credibility, not just title. As we said, look for those who are actively speaking at conferences, who are being published, who are influencing institutional guidelines. Those are the ones that are really powerful that you'll want to partner with. And then next, again, a little bit of a deeper dive into conferences. RSNA, AAOS, DDW, ACC, and others are more than just exhibit halls. Use them to pre-book scheduled meetings, deliver poster presentations, or host side events. Also, I think this is probably one of the most crucial things you can do for these trade shows is pay attention to abstract deadlines and calls for speakers. If you can have a KOL speaking about your technology at the podium, that is bold. And then finally, a deeper dive into digital engagement. 72 of US physicians say they prefer to learn about new devices online before engaging with reps. Platforms like LinkedIn, Doximity, and ResearchGate let you geo-target US clinicians at an affordable rate. So now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the actual clearance timelines and give you an idea of the costs associated with those two. So this illustrates a typical 12-month path for a Class 2 510(k) submission. In the beginning of the webinar, we talked about the typical length of time for a 510(k), and that can be anywhere from 6 to 12 months. For this purpose, I wanted to show what a 12-month sprint would look like, just because I feel like that's a little bit more realistic with what we're seeing with today's speed. So again, timelines and costs vary depending on the device, but this framework represents what we commonly see in the field. So let's walk through each step. Okay, first step is our regulatory pathway assessment. That takes about a month. And this is where you determine the appropriate FDA pathway and begin mapping out your regulatory strategy. The estimated cost for this phase is between $10,000 to $15,000 for strategic consulting and regulatory planning. Next is your predicate device identification. That will take about a month as well. You'll evaluate legally marketed devices to identify a strong predicate. That is critical to streamline your clearance path. These costs are typically included in the initial regulatory consulting fees, so you won't see additional cost for this predicate device identification. Next is gap analysis and data planning, which can take about 2 months. This is a strategic checkpoint. You assess what testing is required, identify gaps in your data, and plan validation efforts. The estimated costs for this are between $15,000 to $30,000, depending on your testing complexity. Next is the actual testing and validation, which can last about 3 months. This phase includes bench testing, biocompatibility studies, and usability testing, depending on class device. So this is estimated to cost between $25,000 and $100,000 or more, depending on the test scope and associated lab fees. Next is submission preparation. You can anticipate that will last about 2 months. You'll compile all of the documentation, device description, testing data, labeling, intended use, and build your full 510(k) package. The estimated costs here are between $50,000 and $40,000, depending on whether it's done in-house or with a consultant. Then you'll have your 510(k) submission to the FDA, which will take about a month. Once it's submitted, the FDA has 90 days for review, though most submissions involve some back and forth requesting additional information. With that submission, you'll have the FDA user fee. And for small businesses, they have a rate of about $7,300 US, with a standard business rate of about $14,600. After that, you'll have the FDA review and clearance, which can take, about 2 months. Again, 2 months to 90 days. If your submission is very well prepared and the predicate is strong, you can expect clearance within 6 to 12 months. So when we look at the total estimated cost of that, most Class 1, Class 2 submissions cost between $75,000 to $250,000 end to end. Again, this includes regulatory consulting, testing, submission prep, and fees, but just keep in mind, this does not include internal team time or post-clearance marketing. So, and it's also essential to begin your commercial and clinical strategy well before you actually submit to the FDA. In fact, during the gap analysis and data planning phase, we recommend defining your US value proposition, especially if you're entering from abroad, starting US specific messaging for buyers and clinicians, identifying your key opinion leaders based on publication activity, society involvement, and clinical specialty. Building relationships early is important so KOLs can help shape your story, validate your claims, and support your launch efforts post-clearance. That alignment between regulatory, marketing, and clinical voices is what sets strong market entrants apart, particularly when you're trying to gain traction very quickly after FDA approval. Now moving on to our PMA submission timeline. This slide outlines the end-to-end process for bringing a Class 3 medical device to the US market through the PMA, which is pre-market approval pathway. As you can see, this process is far more complex, expensive, and time-consuming than the 510(k) route. So let's walk through each phase of the timeline, which typically spans between 24 to 36 months, and even sometimes longer depending on FDA feedback and clinical results. Step 1 is the regulatory pathway assessment. This should take about 2 months. You'll work with a regulatory partner to evaluate classification, clinical requirements, and FDA expectations. The estimated cost for this is between $25,000 to $50,000 for consulting and strategic planning. Next is your pre-submission strategy and FDA Q-Sub meeting. This takes about 3 months, and this is where you formally engage FDA, align on study design, endpoints, and agree on trial expectations. The estimated costs here are between $20,000 and $40,000, and that includes the regulatory preparation and Q-Sub logistics. Next is the clinical trial design and IRB approval, which you can expect to take about 4 months. This is designing the trial protocol and securing IRB approval across various trial sites. The estimated cost for this segment of launch is between $100,000 to $250,000. Next is the clinical trial execution. That takes about 12 months. Now, this is the most time-consuming and expensive step. Multi-center trials, patient enrollment, monitoring, and data collection are all included in this. The estimated costs here are between $1 to $5 million, depending on indication, endpoints, and scale. Then we have data analysis and report generation, which will take about 4 months. This is the final statistical analysis, technical reports, and preparation of clinical study summaries, and you can expect to spend between $100,000 to $300,000 on this stage. Next is the PMA submission preparation. This should take you about 3 months, and this is pulling together all clinical, technical, manufacturing, and labeling data into the formal PMA submission. The estimated cost here are between $100,000 to $250,000. Next is the PMA submission to FDA. This will take about a month. The FDA will perform an administrative review before it proceeds to an in-depth evaluation. What you'll pay here is the FDA user fee, which for small businesses, and don't get sticker shock here, is about $480,000. For large businesses, it's about $480,000, and small businesses get a discount of about $120,000. After that, there will be the FDA review and advisory panel, which can take about 6 months. Your submission is reviewed by FDA staff and often by external advisory committees. You may be required to present publicly as well during this time. The costs here are mostly internal or consultant driven. Public advisory prep can add about $25,000 to $75,000 during this stage. Next, we have the final decision and approval, which takes about a month. If successful, this is when you'll receive your approval letter and you can begin commercialization. When we look at all of this, marketing and KOL alignment should not wait until the device is approved. Here's where to start. Let's look at KOL identification and engagement. That should begin during your clinical trial design. Involve influential physicians to help shape the trial protocol and build long-term advocates. Consider enrolling KOLs as trial investigators or even advisors. They will become your most credible champions later on when you commercialize. Also, marketing strategy and development should begin in parallel with data analysis and submission prep. Start positioning your clinical results for commercial messaging. Define your value proposition and payer messaging early, especially if reimbursement is going to be a barrier. By the time you reach FDA review, your commercial team should be preparing for launch with aligned messaging, trained KOLs, and an outreach strategy built on the foundation of your clinical evidence. So let's recap the strategic choice between the USA and Asia. The US advantages are that it's high value, structured reimbursement, investor interest, and strong KOL infrastructure. Some challenges you'll see in the US is it is a higher upfront investment, there's longer time to revenue, and there are more complex regulatory hurdles. For Asia, some advantages we see is that you'll have faster initial sales, lower entry barriers, and adaptable distributor models. But there are also some challenges there too, with pricing pressure, less transparency, and smaller average deal sizes. So again, as we think about coming into the US, align your launch plan with your device's evidence maturity, with your funding reality, and your exit or your growth horizon. And remember, as you enter the US, your first market doesn't have to be your only one, but it should strategically position you for the next. All right, so now we're going to move on to the Q&A portion of our webinar. If you haven't already, please go ahead and add your questions into the chat or to the Q&A box.
Okay, thanks, Lawrence. Yeah, for the very meaningful introduction how to go into the US and MedTech industries. Thank you. And I have a first question collect from the participants today. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, because the key opinion leaders is very, very important when going into the US and MedTech markets. So my question is about how can US key opinion leaders be localized effectively through the BMMGs, and so BMG can share a real world case study for help like the principle in Taiwan, how to be down to the earth, the MedTech USA the market. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wes. So at BMMG, we help MedTech companies identify and engage US-based key opinion leaders by analyzing who's publishing, speaking, and shaping clinical discourse within relevant specialties. We focus on identifying individuals whose interests and influence aligned with our client's technology and use case. So what this looks like is targeting KOLs based on publication history, conference participation, and advisory board affiliations, developing tailored messaging that reflects US clinical regulatory and reimbursement priorities, creating content and engagement strategies that facilitate meaningful dialogue, whether through digital education, Congress presence, or strategic collaborations. Now, while we don't lead clinical trials or manage investigator relationships directly, we ensure that our clients are positioned for credible, high-impact interactions with the right clinical voices in the US ecosystem. So what that can look like if you're wanting to leverage a KOL in your regulatory and your commercial journey. So as I shared, once we vet these KOLs, they have to be bought into our vision, obviously. So we need to make sure that their beliefs, their visions are aligned with your technology, the benefits it provides, and your values and beliefs as a company. And then from there, it's all about coming together and having a unified voice through all of these regulatory milestones and then ultimately into commercialization as well. That can look like co-written white paper, peer-reviewed journal articles. That can be a co-host of an educational webinar, which again, you have to be careful of exactly what claims you're making at whatever commercialization stage you're in. But there are ways to interact with them. You could work with specific KOLs to be at the trial sites, to be a part of your clinical studies. So there's a lot of different ways that we can engage with these KOLs and find success. I know for one of our clients, we created a KOL advisory board for them or with them. And we had a really hard-hitting and powerful team of KOLs who would come together once a year. They would talk about what works, what doesn't, help guide our messaging, help guide any additions or changes or improvements that our client would make to their product. And then after that, they would be invigorated and excited to go out back to their practice, out into the world and talk about the product, to utilize the product. So that's just one example of ways that we can really harness and leverage that power. And then another thing that we've seen work really nicely is getting KOL buy-in from the very beginning and saying, this is where we want to go with our partnership with you. This is what it takes. And this is ultimately the different activities that we want to see. Now, this program isn't for everybody, but if you're in it with us, it's going to be great. And get their buy-in early on to continue to build their case numbers, to continue to build their publications, and have them be a real partner for you, not just somebody who uses your technology and then puts it on a shelf and doesn't think about it again.
Yeah, thank you. And I guys, BMG the variable offers for carriers collaborations with the principal in Asia's MedTech companies. Yeah, thank you for your answers. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I see here too, for MedTech principals in Asia, how can we identify qualified agents or distributors in the US through BMMG services and support? What are the best practices for outbound approaching and managing distribution across different states or regions? So while BMMG does not serve as a distributor or matchmaking service, we do help clients define distributor criteria, prepare market-facing materials, and equip teams with what they need to attract and manage US partners effectively. And this includes creating US-specific value propositions, one-pagers, and pitch decks tailored for distributors, advising on sales enablement materials that support onboarding and distributor alignment, offering insight into how US distributors think, what they need to see in a new product, and how to structure those early conversations. Best practices we've seen succeed include starting with a focused regional rep or independent network rather than national groups, ensuring clinical validation and sales tools are in place before that initial distributor outreach, and keeping partnership expectations aligned with your product's current level of traction and regulatory status. Now, again, like I said, we don't broker these deals, but we're often involved in preparing clients to successfully approach and manage those relationships. Okay, I also see a question here. How can we design and execute an effective marketing strategy for MedTech principals? So again, an effective strategy starts with a deep understanding of the clinical use case, the stakeholder landscape, and the US buying process. So our work typically follows this roadmap. Number one, market intelligence. You want to define personas, buying committees, reimbursement dynamics, and key differentiators. Then you'll need to think also about a messaging platform. So position your product clearly for US physicians, payers, and procurement, like we talked about during the webinar. We have to think about what they want and put our offering in their language. And this often includes localized terminology and claims. Then thinking about a channel strategy. It's a mix of digital, KOL engagement, conference presence, account-based marketing, and even some of the old favorites that we have like direct mail campaigns, call campaigns. basically thinking, what are all of the ways that we can reach our target, and are we leveraging those to the best of our ability and in a way that moves the needle, where we're seeing that we're having commercial growth, that we're booking sales meetings, that we're moving the needle on sales. And then thinking about execution, so campaigns, content development, demand generation, and sales enablement to support your sales reps or your distributors. Basically, when we think about the strategy, BMMG will act as an extension of your team. And that's from pre-commercial planning through post-clearance acceleration. We're happy to walk through examples tailored to your clinical focus and stage of entry if you'd like to have a deeper conversation about any of that. Okay, I see another question. Sure, the question is, want to know whether products with EU ready is an advantage for speeding up the whole PMA application procedure and marketing work drive up. I don't, the EU, having the EU mark is definitely a great accomplishment. And I think that, it's a good foundation for when you're looking at FDA clearance, but the FDA process is entirely its own beast. So you might have some studies that are done in the EU that would be applicable towards regulatory milestones, but you just need to think about your pilot studies in the US, if there's anything from your EU submission that can be leveraged, and then work very closely with a regulatory consultant to make sure that anything that you might want to think about leveraging from an EU application would also be applicable for FDA. But again, those are completely separate items. I do think that the EU having the CE mark is great, but again, not a ton of bearing on FDA. Maybe what it could show is that your technology has been seen viable and has been cleared in multiple countries, multiple continents, which could add some validity there, but FDA is its own beast.
Yeah, thank you. And there are another questions. Can I ask? Yeah.
Yes, I do see another question here. And it's asking more about conferences and how you determine what conference you should attend. So I think that it really depends on your disease state and on your technology, and also thinking about the timing of everything. So if you are, if you're still at the very beginning of your FDA clearance journey, exhibiting at a trade show is likely not what you need to be doing. That is going to come as you get closer to launch, and you need to keep regulatory restrictions in mind if you're wanting to be at a trade show. I think that as you're in the approval phases and you're going through your regulatory milestones, it's great to attend conferences, it's great to network. It's great to hear about the state of the industry and about your specific disease state that your technology is for. But you need to think about what makes sense from a commercial launch standpoint before you do any kind of booth. When you're looking at what events to attend, I often find that going to a large national program is great for networking. If you already know geographically where in the US you want to launch, look at local chapter meetings of larger national associations. So, for example, we have for neuro, the Congress of Neurological Surgeons that meets once a year. There are smaller, geographically concentrated neurosurgery meetings throughout the US, all during the year, where you'll have a much better chance to have one-on-one conversations with targets that you want to engage as KOLs, and get voice of customer, learn more about their needs, kind of boots on the ground, feet on the street approach there.
Yeah, thank you. One question.
Yes.
Yeah. About thought leadership is also very important. It might be the same as the KOL engagement, but in Asia's company, also especially in Taiwan, many executive leaders they are not good as the over the insightful the knowledge and the industries, the trends, something like their variable application or technology the advantage by the social media such as LinkedIn. So how to BMG to help these principles in Taiwan for the executives, the leaders to do the meaningful and valuable the thought leadership campaign, because many executives leaders is not very good as English, so they don't like to the share insights or unusual custom to share their insights via social media. Yes, this is our questions.
Absolutely, thank you. And that's a great question, Wes. So we have a good approach for thought leadership here with BMMG and looking at positioning you as somebody who is seen as legitimate in the industry and somebody who, as we mentioned before, with procurement teams, they are much more willing to speak to somebody if they're already seen as a thought leader. So we understand the importance of that.
Yep.
So we like to do a multi-channel approach. We like to look at, obviously, social media being a big platform, LinkedIn, ResearchGate, Doximity, those kinds of things, but that's only one piece of the thought leadership pie here. And I will dig into that and how, if you're talking about, well, English might not be something that's so comfortable for us, that is a-okay. And I'll dig into that momentarily. Another thing we like to do to generate thought leadership, to establish that legitimacy, is look at awards and recognition. And that can be for a leader specifically, it can be for the company, it can be for the device. Some awards you need to think about, they have to be fully approved or cleared from an FDA standpoint, but we can look at awards like the most trusted CEO in MedTech. Things like this that start to build you up. It could be one of the 50 fastest growing teams in the United States, one of the most clinically viable devices of 2025. There are a ton of different awards that we can pursue on your behalf. Typically, there's some sort of application fee. However, those are typically minimal. And once we get those awards, we can leverage those on your website, on social media, in your email signatures, and start to show that you have a long story here. You didn't just pop up one day when you received FDA clearance. You've been winning awards and being recognized for months and years during your regulatory approval process that validate what you're doing in the market and your knowledge about your disease state, your industry, and what it takes to be successful from a commercialization and from a business standpoint as well. Another thing that we look at for thought leadership is webinars, podcasts, and blogs. So there's a lot of really great third-party opportunities for you to speak with somebody who is seen as a very respected member of the medical community. And that's typically through an association, a medical association, or something like Device Talks. There's a ton of really great podcasts, webinars, and resources that can be leveraged to promote your thought leadership, and your technology to thousands of the right people. That would be a really great way to continue to boost your thought leadership. And then the great part about that too is you might have one podcast, you might have one webinar, but we can then leverage audio bites, video clips from each one of your engagements and publish them on your social media and showcase, hey, our CEO was just featured on Device Talks West. And that adds another layer of legitimacy as well. So then we loop back around here to our social media, which I think for a lot of us will be primarily LinkedIn. The way that BMMG manages that, there's some good stuff on Twitter too, but I'm seeing more and more that strategics, healthcare providers, administrators, they tend to be on LinkedIn. And the way that we would work with you and make sure that you're fully comfortable is that BMMG designs a 30-day rolling content calendar. So we look at what are some of your company milestones that are coming up? What are wins for you? What is information if we can't talk about your actual device yet or the actual product features, which we shouldn't do too much of because again, we're wanting to talk about how you're a leader, how you understand the climate, how you understand that there is a problem with today's standard of care. We would create about a month-long calendar for you. We would create all the copy. We would create any graphics that would go along with that. We make sure that we're looking at applicable hashtags for what people are talking about in your sector. And then we would publish that on your profile on your behalf. Again, obviously you would approve all of that content and say, yes, this aligns with my voice, it aligns with my vision, it aligns with how I want to project myself to the industry, but we do the heavy lifting as far as the content creation and publishing. And then another thing we do, which I think is very important, and even if you don't work with us to do this, I think it is something that is imperative for leaders in your position to be doing, is to look at relevant posts in the industry about other technology, about the landscape, about the disease state, and interact with comments on that post. So talk about how insightful something is, offer up your opinion, respond to a surgeon who has made a really great point, and start to inject yourself into these conversations so that when your name is popping up on your own profile, when they're seeing that you're on Device Talks, when they're seeing that you have an award, they're going to remember they've interacted with you directly on different forums.
Thank you for a very grateful reply. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a couple of other questions here. I'm just looking at them. I will need to get back to you, Ken, on your question because I think it's just it's something that I want to be able to dig into a little bit more before I respond live. So I can shoot you an email tomorrow. It's 9 p.m. here. So, or yeah, 10 p.m. here. But I can definitely get a response to you tomorrow. Let's see. Key milestones. So, Charlie, I would love to share some more with you for case studies. I think some of it would take a little bit too long to finish before we're done with this webinar. Just know that, and again, I'm happy to send you samples of my work too, and include Wes and Andy and Zach, but a lot of the case studies that we do have to be anonymized just because of the sensitivity of strategy that goes along with these case studies. If you're okay with receiving an anonymized case study, I'll certainly get that over to you. Wes, was there any other questions that you had just about some of the commercialization or launch items that you wanted more information on?
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence. I think this at this time is no more questions about the commercialization strategy, but Billing will follow up the participants, the webinars, and maybe they have maybe later after the meetings they have the specific and solid questions, and maybe we can hold a conference course for the individual companies to how to solve these problems when they into the USA market. Yeah, but this time no more question, I think. Yeah.
Perfect. So thank you, Wes, and thank you so much everybody for attending. I really appreciated your questions. Oh shoot, I see I missed some more questions in the chat, so I apologize, but after our webinar today, I'll be getting a full report of the chat log and the Q&A log as well. So if I missed any questions, I will circle back with you. The B-Link team and I will circle back with you and provide some additional insight. And And also, I want to just thank everybody for attending. And also, we're offering a free 30-minute consultation with West, Andy, myself, Zach, the B LinkedIn BMMG team to understand where you're currently positioned, what your goals are for potential US launch, and maybe brainstorm with you on some immediate first steps that we would take, and then talk about how we could potentially partner to make sure that your launch was a successful one. Wes, do you have anything you want to add?
No, thank you, and thank a lot for attending the webinars hosted by the BMG and the bidding. And if you have any questions about into the user MedTech markets, please email me, and we will hold free 30 minutes consultation with you for how to solve your demand points or pain point. Thank you.